Hi, my name is Sarah Handler, and I'm a program manager in the Microsoft Identity Division working on identity protection.
Hey everyone, my name is Rohini Goyal. I'm also a program manager in the Identity Division at Microsoft, and I own all the core account protection features.
We're going to start off today by briefly providing some context on what it means to assume breach and why it's so important, especially in today's world. We're going to show a quick demo on everything that can go wrong if you don't assume breach, and how easy it is for an attacker to completely take over your environment. We're going to follow up by highlighting the policies that you can use and enforcing your environment that follow the assume breach model and will protect your users from these types of attacks. And we'll also show you how to kick off response and investigations flows when suspicious activity does take place. We're going to end this session with a quick demo on how assume breach can frustrate your attackers and prevent them from gaining access to your environment, and the next steps that you need to take to deploy this in your own environment. Now, Rohini's going to talk a little bit more about why you should assume breach.
Thanks, Sarah. So to kick things off, we'll start by going over what it means to assume breach and why it's more important now than ever to deploy that kind of model in your corporate environment. If we go back 10 to 20 years, this is what a traditional corporate model used to look like. All assets and resources were located under a single corporate network. Users could only access sensitive information from within a corporate network and only from a corporate issued device. Even all applications were hosted internally. Since everything was inside that same network perimeter, only a single layer of network security was required at all times to secure access to corporate information. This would normally be accomplished by utilizing a single network firewall. But with technological advancements, the current corporate model looks very different. If we fast forward to today's world, the internet has completely transformed how we get things done. The corporate workforce today doesn't consist of just employees. You might have worked with external partners and contractors who will be accessing your sensitive information from all around the world while coming from their own devices. Especially with the changes that have been brought about due to the COVID pandemic, users are now logging in from locations they were never logging in from before, and they're also using non-corporate issued devices. Remote work is forcing people to authenticate from their homes while using their personal devices. So not only does our corporate footprint look different now than it did 20 years ago, but how we protect our environment requires a completely different approach as well. So here's the thing. Even though technology has changed how we access resources and it's provided us the flexibility to access information from any location and using any device, and the approach that we take to protect our resources is completely different as well, the frequency at which malicious activity is happening continues to increase. In fact, if we look at password spray, that has increased over 230% in just the last year alone. And phishing, for example, continues to be one of the most prominent attacks towards enterprise accounts, where 1 in every 3 attacks is phishing. If we look at just the data from last month, so August 2020, we had 5.8 billion attacker-driven sign-ins. And of those, 9 million of them were marked as high risk. And high risk normally means that we are incredibly confident that this account has been compromised. So this data reflects just how important it is to secure your corporate access. Given that employees are now authenticating from different locations and devices than they were before, we need to enable them to be productive in this new remote world while still protecting them and the resources that they access. The best way to secure your environment is to assume breach. By assume breach, you need to make sure that you are employing a zero trust model and never trusting the user, even if they're coming in with the correct credentials or even if they're using a device that they have used before. Every access request should be strongly authenticated and authorized within policy constraints while also being inspected for anomalies before access is fully granted. Now, Sarah's going to show us a breach in action.
Thanks, Rohini. Let's go take a look at what an attacker sees in your unsecured environment.
All right, so I'm a malicious user who wants to compromise the Woodgrove organization. I found this user, Abby G, online. Maybe I found her email address in our LinkedIn profile or on the company website, or maybe I just knew that she worked for Woodgrove and guessed what her email address would be. So I got this email address, and from this, we're not only going to compromise Abby, we're going to launch a phishing campaign against the entire organization and get malware dropped onto their company devices, essentially owning their organization's environment. All right, so we have this email address. I'm going to open up PowerShell and open up my PowerShell script to compromise her account and then launch that phishing campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and get our password spray tool. And then I have her email in a file. And I also have a list of common passwords that I got from a credential dump online. So we're going to go ahead and see whether her email is out there in the wild. And what do you have it? She has a very common insecure password, fall 2020 with an exclamation point at the end. Her organization's password policy probably requires it to be changed 4 times a year, likely requires 1 uppercase and 1 special character, resulting in this. Now that we have Abby's credentials, what we are going to do is we're going to use these credentials to start a PowerShell session because they have not blocked legacy auth in this environment. So I'm going to just convert her password here. We will be able to authenticate using legacy authentication. So no MFA prompt needed to totally get into this organization. All right, now let's make sure that we converted that password correctly. Great. Now we're going to go ahead and create our PowerShell session. Looks great. And we can dump the gal. So far, the mistakes they've already made is she had an insecure password that I was able to easily password spray. And they don't require MFA, right? They haven't blocked legacy authentication. So it's able to authenticate using basic auth. So we've dumped the gal. We can go ahead and take a look at that file and look at this. This is just a treasure trove for an attacker, the entire gal from their organization. All right. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set up a forwarding rule to be able to forward all incoming mail for this organization. And you can use this a few ways. It'll let you know what's coming in, but it'll also allow you to see emails, potentially copy one of them to create a compelling phishing mail. So now we're going to come and try to log into her account. So Abby at Woodgrove, her nice insecure password. All right. And what I'm looking for is an email that I can use that looks familiar to end users in her organization to create a good phishing mail. And look, perfect email right here. It's urgent. There's action that's going to be taken if they don't comply, and there's a link. So what I've done is I've saved this email to my computer, and I've taken this hyperlink and instead made it this phishing link. So this phishing link is where we will get all of these users to give up their credentials. So I've saved that on my desktop. Okay, so now we're going to define this new body of the email using our fishy link. Now we're going to send the mail from Abby's account. All right, and it succeeded. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into Abby's account. And in the sent items, you can see that she sent a phishing email to Rohini's email account. So what's going to happen is Rohini now is going to come and click on this link. If we take a look at this link, it's a phishing website. So when Rohini types in her email address, she'll then put in her password. But if you look at the URL, this is clearly not Office that she's signing into. And then she's going to sign in. It'll download a file. That file is going to have some malware on it that gets dropped into her machine. And in the span of about 5 minutes, we've gone from just having the email address of someone in the organization to getting malware onto a privileged user's account, onto their machine.
All right, so we've just seen how easy it is for an attacker to gain access to your organization when you aren't employing the zero trust and assume breach principles. Now let's take a look at how you can use policies to prevent these types of attacks in your environment. When we take a look at the zero trust architecture and remember what Rohini was just talking about with the current model being incredibly complex, it's important to note that in order for this deployment to be complete, you need to protect on all levels, on the identities, the devices, the data and apps, as well as the network. We saw how password spray was first used as the initial attack vector to get into the organization, and we're going to show how password protection can be used to prevent that. Then we're going to look at how conditional access and identity protection in conjunction with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint can be used to prevent both credential stuffing and malware. We also saw phishing occur in the demo. And while we aren't going to spend too much time on that today, it's important to note that Defender for Office 365 has built-in protections that once you use will prevent phishing in your organization. Now let's take a look at how to actually set up these policies. Let's look at how to turn on the policies that you need to enable when you assume breach in your environment. The first one we're going to take a look at today is our password protection policy. So we're going to come to the security menu in Azure AD, where you'll find a lot of these policies. We'll go to authentication methods and then password protection. Now, password protection is important because we know that users have a tendency to use weak credentials and then reuse those weak credentials. So password protection is a great tool to prevent your users from using some of those weak passwords. There's two aspects to password protection. There's the global banned password list that we automatically apply to all Azure AD users. And then there's the custom banned password list that you can define for your organization. Things to think about when you're configuring the banned password list are terms that may be specific to your geographic location, your industry, or even internal terms that are used by employees of your company. So you'll see in this example, we are in Seattle. So both Seahawks and Mariners would be something people may be using for passwords. So we have blocked those as passwords. Once you have enabled password protection, you can set it to enforced. We're going to want to look at conditional access policies. Now, these will set up policies that your users have to satisfy before they can access your corporate resources. And the first one that you should definitely set up is to block legacy authentication. So we're going to come in here. We're going to select a certain group. We generally suggest that you start with a small group of users before rolling it out to everyone. We're going to apply this to all our cloud apps. Another thing to note is that this may take some fine tuning, and part of why we suggest setting it up in report only mode so that you don't accidentally lock yourself out of critical applications. So here, actually, let's start with Exchange. Another thing to note here is that you can also apply these to on-premises apps via application proxy. So this is really flexible for you. And then we are going to apply this to our legacy authentication clients. All right, so now that we've defined when this is going to apply, we will select the control, and we want to entirely block access from those legacy authentication clients. We suggest that you first turn this on in report only mode to watch what the impact of this policy will be in your environment. And then when you're ready, flip it to on. Now, the next type of policy that we should take a look at are risk-based policies. And when you use identity protection as part of Azure AD, we have risk policies for both sign-in risk and user risk. So let's take a look at sign-in risk. Now, this is a good way to prevent users who may be risky at the point of authentication from accessing resources until they are able to prove they are who they say they are with an MFA prompt. So we generally suggest that you apply this to medium risk or higher. You can also use user risk policies set to high risk. I'm going to remove that client apps condition here. And then for this one, instead of blocking access, we're going to want to require multi-factor authentication. So this way, if Azure AD detects something risky about a particular authentication request, we can require MFA in real time. And if it's the legitimate user, they gain access to their resources. And if it's the illegitimate user, they're going to be blocked because they won't be able to complete that MFA prompt. And again, we're going to turn it on in report only mode at first. The final type of policy that we want to look at, you can also turn on, is if you are not entitled or not licensed to our identity protection, you can also turn on multi-factor authentication without the risk condition for every authentication request to a particular type of application or from a particular type of device. So you can change any of these conditions here, and then the control or the grant control here would be grant access with MFA. So once we've turned on these in report only mode, you want to watch them for a little bit and then turn them to on. The last two pieces that we want to look at, we can also make sure that we have policies to require there not to be a risky device itself by using the integration with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So you can come in here and you can set a policy to require that device risk as determined by Microsoft Defender is not above a certain risk level. And this will feed in as a condition when we come back to conditional access. You can set a control that the device has to be marked as compliant. So it's a really great way to ensure that the user isn't risky as determined by Microsoft Defender. And finally, we'll want to use Microsoft Defender for Office 365 to put policies in place to prevent phishing and to enable safe links in your organization to prevent that phishing attack that we saw earlier in our demo. Now that we've seen how you can prevent breach by using policies, Rohini's going to show you what to do if you are breached and how you can react with speed.
Thanks. So now we're going to go over some tools that will let you kick off response and investigation workflows.
A key part of responding to a security incident is seeing all signals and alerts in one place. For example, if there's an account with suspicious login activity that is also accessing sensitive data, I want to be able to tie these alerts together and get a better understanding of everything that occurred across the entire ecosystem. To make this easier, we can head over to Azure Sentinel, a cloud-based SIEM solution which serves as a single place to consume the intelligence across Microsoft and non-Microsoft alerts. Sentinel will aggregate alerts from across the entire system and help connect them together. So here we can see that Sentinel is currently pulling in alerts from different products across Microsoft, application alerts from Microsoft Cloud App Security. We have identity alerts coming in from Azure Active Directory, and even device health alerts coming in from Microsoft Defender. But I can drill into each of these incidents to learn more. For example, here it looks like a brute force attack occurred against Azure Portal. To start my investigation process, I can first assign this incident to a particular user, and this is incredibly useful for incident tracking. In this case, it looks like someone on my team has already assigned this incident to me. But the real magic happens in the investigations view. And here I can see all of the different accounts that were targeted during this brute force attack. Now, this is a pretty good indicator that there might be other suspicious activity. So I can actually directly pull in other related alerts that have been fired on each of these accounts. Let's take Tim's account here as an example. If I click related alerts, Sentinel will pull in all of the alerts that have been fired on Tim's account. And here we can see there are a ton of events that have been fired on Tim's account. And I can do this again on another account that was targeted during this brute force attack. So Sentinel will help me get a full picture of how this incident has impacted users and overall resources. An incident like this will require quite a bit of investigation. And a key aspect of responding to a security incident is automation. When coming across some suspicious activities, such as this brute force attack, time becomes incredibly critical. And you need to start the response process and kick off investigation workflows almost immediately. So to build out our automation playbook, we can leverage Azure Logic Apps. Azure Logic Apps is a cloud service that will allow you to schedule, automate, and orchestrate tasks, especially those that are spread across different applications, data systems, and services. Here, I already have a few Logic Apps that I had created earlier, but if I drill into one of these, I can start building all the workflows I want initiated when I trigger this Logic App. Let's start by building out an application that will inform my SecOps team of a new incident that requires investigating. So when I go into the Logic Apps Designer, I'll be provided many different templates that I can build off of, such as sending an email whenever any SharePoint activity happens, or even performing actions across third-party applications, such as Twitter and Slack. In this case, I'll be firing the Logic App directly from Azure Sentinel when I'm performing my investigation. So we'll start off with a blank Logic App. I'll begin by searching for Azure Sentinel. Here I'll be provided a couple of trigger options, and I'll just choose the first one. Now I can easily build out the tasks that I want to have happen. Since this Logic App will be used to notify my SecOps team, I want to inform them through a Teams notification. So I'll go ahead and add a new step, and I'll search for Microsoft Teams. And here you can see all of the different workflow options that Logic Apps supports. In this case, I just want to post a message. So I'll select this one, and then I'll start to choose which teams and which channel I want this message to be posted to. And as you can see, Logic Apps is automatically populating this information for me. I'll then format a message that I want posted. And I can even format this message directly in Logic Apps. Logic Apps will also let me pull information dynamically from Azure Sentinel. So in this case, I want the message to also include the alert display name so that my SecOps team actually knows which alert that they need to investigate. I'll even add in the description And maybe I'll also add in the workspace ID just to provide a bit more information. Go ahead and fix the formatting here. And now that I have everything defined, I just need to click save. And our logic app has been created. Now, if we head back to our brute force incident back into Azure Sentinel, if I click on view full details, I can navigate to playbooks. And this is where we'll see all the logic apps that we had already configured, including the one that we had just created. And so since this incident has impacted several users, as we just saw earlier, it will require some investigation. So with just one click, I can trigger this logic app. Now, if we head to Microsoft Teams, it looks like a new message was just posted on the investigation requests channel. And just like that, we see that this new message was posted about the brute force attack against Azure Portal, just like we intended to. I had also mentioned earlier that Sentinel works with non-Microsoft technologies as well. And we can leverage that using data connectors. So if I head back to the main menu of Azure Sentinel, we can select data connectors. And here you can bring in intelligence from other vendors directly into Sentinel. You can set up integrations with many different vendors, such as Amazon Web Services, Cisco, Citrix, F5, and there's even Zscaler. These signals would flow into Azure Sentinel, and you'd be able to treat them just like you would signals from Microsoft technology.
Now we're going to revisit that original scenario, but this time in an environment where they have assumed breach.
Let's assume that this organization has deployed all of those policies that Sarah had went over earlier. Password protection to require stronger passwords, conditional access policies to block legacy authentication and require MFA, Microsoft Defender for Office 365 to protect against phishing, and leverage Microsoft Defender to prevent malware from infecting devices. We'll start by performing a password spray attack. And because this organization has password protection deployed, all of those weak passwords that we'll see being attempted will come back without a match. So I will run this part of the script here to start the password spray attack. And we can see that all of these are coming back without a match, but there was a successful match for this randomly generated password. And this script also indicates that Abby's account here is protected with MFA. So we can see that the organization is leveraging both password protection as well as conditional access to have strong passwords and require MFA. But of course, the bad actor is going to try to outsmart these MFA policies by trying to log in using legacy authentication. So before we get to that, let's first make sure that our password here is set up in the correct format. And because of the password spray we just ran, we know that Abby's password is this randomly generated set of characters. And looks like our password is now in the correct format. So when we try to log in using legacy authentication, we'll see that the script comes back with access is denied. And again, this is because of those conditional access policies that are blocking all sign-in requests coming from legacy protocols. So at this point, even if the bad actor was able to successfully guess the user's password, which in this case, they were able to guess that randomly generated set of characters, they wouldn't be able to log in. You know, we have the legacy auth isn't an option because of the conditional access policies, but the bad actor wouldn't be able to complete an MFA challenge either if they were prompted for it.
Now, although this organization has strong passwords and is using MFA and blocking legacy authentication, the layers of protection don't end there. And so we've logged into Abby's account again using legacy authentication, but this time we want to show the protections that are happening to prevent phishing and to prevent malware from infecting devices. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and set the body of our email to be this phishing email. We're going to use the same template that Sarah had used in her original demo. And then we'll go ahead and start sending some phishing mail out to people in this tenant. I'm going to run this part of the script right here. And so it's sending the phishing mail out to folks in the GAL. And then we're going to try running this again just to see that the block had actually been performed. So now that we've sent a bunch of phishing mails from Abby's account, if we head over to the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, we can see here that Abby's account has been flagged because of all the phishing mails that we've sent out. Abby's account is now considered a restricted user, and we will not be able to send any emails from this account anymore. And for all the phishing messages that were successfully sent through before Abby's account was flagged for phishing, because this organization had deployed Microsoft Defender, any malware that was linked to those phishing emails would not infect the devices, and the devices would remain protected. So as you can see here, because of deploying password protection, because of using conditional access to enforce multiple policies, and with all the protections that are brought in with Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Defender for Office 365, every layer of the attack is protected. And so this is the benefit of assuming breach.
Now that we've seen what the world can look like when you assume breach, let's talk about the next steps that you need to take to get there. First are the things that you should do now, as soon as you stop watching this video. The first would be to review the Azure AD Identity Protection reports to see if there's been any malicious activity in your organization. Then you should create the conditional access policy that we looked at earlier to require MFA when there is session risk, and turn it on to report-only mode so you can start to evaluate the impact of this policy. Finally, right now, you should go configure your custom banned password list for your organization and enforce the password protection policy. Then there are some things you should think about doing in the next week to month. And those would be enforcing a conditional access policy to block legacy off, since we know that that's how a lot of compromise occurs, and enable a conditional access user risk policy to force secure password change when a user is high risk. Finally, there's some things you should try to do in the next 3 to 6 months, like enforcing that conditional access policy to require MFA upon medium risk, and deploying Microsoft Defender using Microsoft Endpoint Manager so you can benefit from all the features within Microsoft Defender.
We hope you've learned what it means to assume breach, the importance of deploying this model in today's world, and tools and policies that you can use to secure your environment.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to assume breach.